Yeah? Well, let me take a moment to walk you through, and what did it look like for them, right? So what they've done is they've developed a Winshuttle-based forms and workflow solution. If I'm an end user in the Smith & Nephew business, I can go into a portal, I can choose the part of the solution that's relevant to the process I'm trying to walk through. I've got a very easy form, if you will, to interact with. You can see here things like being able to check before I start the process, hey, with what I'm about to request. Now, in this case, it's a create vendor process that we're using as an example. So, of course, the first thing I want to do is have the ability to check, right? Being connected to SAP, having the ability to check is this vendor actually already in the system? If so, make sure I check that so I don't actually create a duplicate, right? As I'm working through and putting in the information, of course, having the ability, again, to validate, whether that's validating against the SAP business rules that you've set up, some additional business rules will come onto that you might need to configure, or in this case, being able to interact with the third-party system, right? Hey, things like Address Doctor, where I want to make sure that the address information that I'm entering in is actually correct. And we know plenty of examples where pretty basic thing, but how crucial address information is to make sure that as you're interacting with the vendor and sending out shipments, I've heard a lot of people talk about 3PL vendors and what's the impact, right? Well, we've got lots and lots of examples where if you get the address wrong, what's the practical impact of the business? But again, imagine the articulated lorry turning around in the middle of the road because it has the wrong address and having to come back and get rerouted, right? Additional business rules. So again, simplifying the process for the users as they're going through that, hey, if I'm dealing with this particular vendor account group, I know that there's a limited set of options that are available for me, and being able to set that up automatically. Again, it's really focused on both simplifying the process, but ultimately making sure that what we're driving through the process is accurate data. Yeah? You can see some additional examples here about, again, if I'm a user and I'm going through it, how do I simplify from the standpoint of being able to leverage what's already in the system, easily modify that information, and then ultimately, hey, if it's something that I need to, as part of the process, be able to, in process, flag it up to accelerate how it's handled, I can do things like build in an urgency flag, right? And say, hey, this is pretty critical. We've got a shipment pending on it, and there's some high value, a high value order tied to it. Can you make sure it gets processed today, right? Okay, well, we also talked about the question of visibility and what's it mean to be able to see where things are at in flight, right? And so that's a big part of what the Winshuttle workflow solution provides, is that the reporting, right? So both in process, so I can see what's in flight, where's it at, who's it with, but also when we talk about at the end of the process, being able to do kind of that after action, hey, where do we still potentially have bottlenecks? Where are there additional opportunities for continuous improvement, right? Again, ultimately what Winshuttle is about is being able to drive up the data quality, streamline the process, so reduce the amount of time it takes, if you will, from a data management perspective in SAP, and as a result of that, freeing up time to focus on value add, right? So focus on the value add as compared to the mundane data management, if that makes sense. What I thought would be worthwhile is maybe walk you through how have they deployed Winshuttle, just a quick overview of the process for them. Again, a big part of what Winshuttle does is our focus ultimately is to make customers self-sufficient. So in their deployment, actually, we started by helping them with some initial training and the first deliverable, if you will. Melissa then and her team, which is an internal center of excellence, have then owned the solution and effectively expanded that solution and pushed it out across the organization. And they followed what I would say is a fairly typical and appropriate phased deployment approach, right? So they started with a couple of core processes, and you can see here customer, vendor, and some of the additional items associated to those two pieces of master data. And they started with 2 core countries. Got everything embedded, took the learnings from that, refined the process, and then ultimately continued to expand it in a phased rollout across the rest of Europe. And their follow-on was, so they started with those processes, took a phased approach, and from those learnings, what they're able to then do is focus on the material master process. Again, a couple of sub-processes in the material master management area, and take a pan-European approach. So they've actually done a full European rollout for this next phase of the project. So hopefully that gives you a feeling for, from a Winshuttle perspective, how would you approach deployment, who in the organization might own it, and put it out there. So that's, if you will, a quick overview of Smith & Nephew and how they've specifically deployed it and what it's meant for them. I know we've got, I think, just over 5 minutes left before we're going to get pushed out of the room. What I'd like to do is open it up for questions. Oh, 10 minutes. Thank you, Bjorn. Perfect. We're right on time. We wanted to leave 10 minutes for questions. So, questions? Not normally a shy crowd. Have we made it clear what Winshuttle does? Yeah. Can I ask, do you
Maybe two questions. So is it more of a process or is it a tool, or how should I see this? How should I see the Winshuttle? It's a piece of software or is it actually a process?
Yeah, sorry, so we haven't done a good job then. We are a software vendor. It is a software platform, right? So we sit outside of SAP. And what we do is we effectively make it easier to interact with SAP, if you will. Yep. Other questions?
From a user perspective, what's kind of the real surprise and aha moment when the users say this really helps us?
Well, so again, if you visualize that what we call the data quality circle that Israel had up on the screen earlier, right? The bottom part was the reactive, and the top part was the proactive piece. Probably some of the quickest wins, if you will, and the most value organizations see is, think about master data. What typically happens for a master data team, right? It's, I've got an existing large set of data that I need to maintain, and that can be quite challenging. And in particular, when you think about the process that users need to follow, it's typically follows along these lines, right? There's a set of data already in SAP. I need to amend that data. If I can have the ability to easily extract it, so I can extract just what I need to deal with, put it somewhere where I can easily interact with it, again, Excel in this case, make those changes, and again, things like destination information or pricing updates are good examples that tend to happen, tend to be high volume, and tend to be pretty impactful. Put it there, make those changes, be able to validate that prior to upload, and then ultimately automatically put that back into SAP. We tend to simplistically refer to that as a round-tripping use case. That's a really common, from our perspective, a really common requirement in most organizations, and one that can be quite painful, right? And so if you can simplify that process for your core teams that are responsible for getting their arms around that large data set, the value to the organization can be quite significant. Again, it's the example that Israel talked about, where in that particular example, it was a 7-fold increase in productivity based upon being able to take that approach to data management with Winshuttle. And of course, what does that mean? It means much less time doing the grunt work and a lot more time actually focused on, hey, where else can we improve? What else can we do that would actually add value to the organization? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And something that is also part of the aha moment is that normally, even if you let's assume that you have a solution that is already covering your current requirements. Business change, and it changed very quickly. And you cannot get back to IT every 6 months demanding for new change, because they are not going to be able to give you back all those changes as you need them. So the aha moment came when they realized that they can create by themselves these kind of integrations, and they can easily maintain them updated and aligned with their new requirements. So they can really keep these improvements very, very quickly on time.
Yep.
Technology improvements and getting some real tangible benefits articulated up front. So is that something that you support businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that built into our application set is we actually collect information about kind of the before and after. So we know if you're doing manual data entry in SAP, what's the typical level of effort, if you've automated the process using Winshuttle, and we know that comparison. So we have what we refer to as our benchmarking database. Today, I think it's about 180 million records. Roughly, which is data from customers, right? So we have a really good statistical understanding of that part of the process that says, hey, if you're doing manual data entry and you're trying to streamline that process, what's the potential impact? And so that's something we have that we can work with you on, and we can help model based on what you're doing today. What's the potential impact? And of course, that's a starting point to a conversation, right? Because then it's about looking at, well, what else have you done? Is it actually all manual data entry, or is it a mix of manual and potentially other approaches, but it gives you a good starting point that we can then work with you on to try and really get to where's the highest value add, if you will, and in turn the supporting business case. Yeah. I think we have just a few minutes left, so maybe 1 or 2 more questions if anybody else has a question. Okay, well, if there are no further questions, I believe on the way out we've got copies of the presentation on a memory stick for you. So if you want to go ahead and grab a copy on the way out. Thank you very much for your time and attention, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Good day.